Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you can come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. Hey, so today I have another great guest. His name is Rama Gupta. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about risk, okay, and how to evaluate risk, especially in the apartment industry. I think this is an area that's not given enough attention to, but here's what I do know. The bigger you get and the more you start to expand your portfolio and the more serious you get about growing teams, people, projects, and of course your portfolio, the more important understanding how to underwrite to risk actually becomes, right? So today we have a great guest. His name is Rama Gupta. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I am your host, John Brackett. Another great episode. Glad everybody is here. So Rama, welcome to the show, buddy.
John, thank you for hosting me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Let's start by sharing with our audience. In fact, let me do this. I'm going to invite them into this conversation by introducing you, okay? So Rama owns and manages 10 single-family homes, 2 duplexes. Rama started his career in insurance and risk management as a client executive at Capnick Insurance Group in January of 2017. So Rama primarily works with companies in real estate, so 50% construction, 30% development, and then 20%, of course, manufacturing. And so, you know, his big focus really, of course, is risk mitigation, right? And for many of you out there, operators, you understand the importance of that. My investors that are out there listening in, you also understand the importance of that because that is going to make sure that your investment gets protected, right? Help to mitigate against loss of your principal investment. And so Rama, really interesting story. I know you started off pursuing or on a path to becoming a doctor, right? At, I think it was University of Michigan or Michigan State University?
Michigan State.
Michigan State University. Okay, I was close. So with that said, man, welcome again to the show. Share your stories. You know, help us understand who you are. Share your story, bud.
Absolutely. So you touched on it briefly. I started my initial beginning of my adult life. I was pursuing medicine. I have a science background from Michigan State University. I have a master's in public health, and I have several actually research publications as well. But none of that really matters in the business world, how I've landed here now. So after I graduated, I was applying to med schools, and I was actually living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, running 2 Painting with a Twist franchises for my uncle. If you've never Painting with a Twist, ask your wife or daughter. They've probably done it and they know what it is. Anyways, I got to a point where I'd gone through 2 years of application cycles and been waitlisted 2 years in a row again. I was a average applicant at best, and I was really sick of my life being on hold. So looking at the job prospects, I was pretty unmarketable. I had a science degree, no real world work experience outside of a hospital, and no network. And so I landed here at Capnick because I found a company that was willing to invest in me, take a chance on me, give me the resources and guidance I would need to be successful. All I had to do was put in the work and be willing to learn. And that's been one of my favorite parts of this journey, is having the opportunity to continue learning.
Yeah, hey, I really love what you said, Rama, having the opportunity to continue to learn. You know, I talk about this a lot, right? Learning, man, is such an important element of being successful, really in any industry, but in real estate industry, especially because it's constantly changing, right? It's constantly evolving, which is why I love this business so much. But it's constantly evolving, very dynamic, a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts. You're dealing with different people, different personalities. And so the requirement to continue to learn is very high in this business. And it is very true, I believe, at least based on my own experiences, you know, your capacity for learning or your learning and your income, there's, you know, a direct correlation, right? And I use the word learning and not education because I think there's a big difference. I think you can have an education from a university, okay, but that may not always carry over to what you need to learn to be successful at a particular industry, right? But you can always be learning and always be learning things that are directly applicable to the things that you and I need to do to be more productive at those things, right? Or at that work. So, man, I really love what you said. Thanks for saying that. that right there is a golden nugget for sure. And so I appreciate you sharing that. So Rama, talk to me a little bit about this journey that you've been on, right? So you started off in medicine, transitioned to insurance, right? And so now you've been exposed to mitigating risk, understanding risk, or understanding the different types of risk that are out there surrounding apartment buildings. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But then you also started investing in real estate, right? So now you have some holdings now, you're expanding your holdings. Talk to us a little bit about what made you get into real estate, okay? And, you have 10 homes now, you have a duplex. Obviously, you're looking to scale and grow. Talk to us a little bit about that. Why real estate?
So I'll start from the insurance side and why multifamily real estate has really become one of my core competencies. Initially, when I started out, I did not want to specialize, but I quickly learned that, I didn't want to specialize because I didn't want to be shoehorned or pigeonholed into one, type of business. But then I quickly learned that in order to bring the most value to my clients, I need to specialize and really know these niches inside and out. And it doesn't mean I can't work on other types of business, but this is how I bring the most value and become known as an expert in the field. And then as a firm, we place coverage for just over 300,000 units across the U.S. It was almost a natural fit that I go into this. And then, so growing up, my father's always been in real estate, and I've been managing his portfolio. It's all in one area for probably the greater part of 3.5 years now. Eventually, November of last year, I was more or less forced to take it all over when he passed, and my brother and sister are both out of the state and more or less wanted nothing to do with it. They're both in school right now. So I took on a more or less distressed portfolio. And the good part is there's no debt on it. The bad part is there's years of deferred maintenance and back property taxes, and some were vacant. Then COVID happened. So it's been quite the learning experience along the way. And you're right, I do want to grow and scale. Some of my best mentors or some of the best people I can learn from are my clients. There's so many different aspects of real estate that I don't know. I just know the risk management mitigation part, but there's a world of things that I've learned over the last 2 years, 24 months, when I've really dived into focusing on real estate.
Interesting, man. Hey, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm really sorry to hear about your dad, but I can tell that he did a great job passing his legacy on through you, right? Just based on how you carry yourself, how you communicate. So really appreciate you being on and sharing that story. Rama, I have a question for you that it made me very curious, right? Because of how you shared, how you acquired the current properties that you have now. So you inherited those properties. It sounds like some of them had quite a bit of deferred maintenance. Some of them had extreme deferred maintenance. And it sounds like a couple of them were vacant, right? So when you took that task on, because it sounds like it was a task, talk to us a little bit about that. What were some of the success stories and some of the challenges? Maybe let's start with, just what you didn't know about that portfolio that you were getting into. And when you look back on that today, what did you learn, right? Maybe let's start with that.
Looking back, I saw the whole portfolio and I was overwhelming. The estate really had no money in it. It was asset heavy and the rents were low, but there was no cash in reserves. So seeing I think it was a $72,000 property tax bill, that's a big deal. You really need to take care of that. If not, you'll lose it to the county. First thing I did was I more or less brokered a meeting with the county treasurer and his team and explained the situation. My dad was well known within the county because he was always at tax auctions. So all these properties he bought from tax auctions, the county sold at some point. And I basically we basically brought communication to the forefront and explained what I'm trying to do and that it really impressed upon them that I'm trying to right this ship that's been more or less sinking in their eyes for a long time. And they bought into that. And then next thing I know, they're helping me understand what I can do and work out a deal, more or less a payment plan to take care of this and the best strategies of which ones to address first. And I never once asked for a discount or any tax relief, but I didn't need to. They showed me what I can do to reduce some of the back taxes and basically get it on a manageable payment schedule.
Right.
That was hugely overwhelming, but that was a big weight lifted off my shoulders. And then there were some that were coming 3 years due where there'd be a large fee tacked onto it. And it made more sense to take out a small personal loan to pay those up front. The fee was almost like 25% of the amount owed. So it made more sense to get those paid and then address the rest later. That was probably the biggest one. And then, of course, COVID happened. And so nothing happened for 3 months. So the vacant one sat vacant. During that time, I was able to get a few of I think out of the portfolio, 6 or 7 needed a roof. And I've been able to get 3 of those done since COVID, but it's been slow progress. And then, as you know, or are probably well aware, getting a contractor, or people aren't working and contractors are overworked, they have too much work. So it's been an experience.
Interesting. Man, there's a lot that you said in there that I really like, but one of the biggest standouts is the fact that you had the wherewithal to call the county and literally negotiate a payment plan, right? So that you didn't lose the assets that you inherited. And man, I think that's really smart. And here's why I say that, right? One of the things that I see and I learned over the years as entrepreneurs, the way that we get ourselves in trouble is simply by not dealing with the reality in front of us, right? What I call not dealing with the truth in front of us. We have a tendency of procrastinating until things get worse, and then we're forced to act. I know I've done that in the past, okay? And so when I hear your story and hear how proactive you were at trying to deal with the truth in front of you, which is, hey, if I don't deal with this issue, I'm going to lose everything, right? And I see that, man, a lot. Just neglecting the fact that you need to take action on the challenges that are right in front of you, right? And the natural tendency for human beings, because we're really good at this, is we'll say, okay, you know what? I'm going to deal with this tomorrow, or I'm not going to deal with it at all, right? Because, hey, it's too painful, or I don't know if I can deal with this, right? And so the natural tendency is, again, pushing that out until it snowballs into a bigger problem, and now you're forced to act, but then you're forced to act with greater complexity, right? So what made you why was that your first step? Just out of curiosity, why was that your very first action?
First thing I did is I prioritized more or less the needs of the estate, like what needed to be done. And I saw the first thing that needed to be done was, all right, end of February, I think it's February 28th, this is a big deadline for taxes. And seeing the amount of taxes owed, I was scared. I really didn't know what to do. And these aren't great condition homes. So it's not like I could go and get an appraisal and take out money against them. It's not like these would be easy to move in this market. And then boom, COVID. Like I had plans to move some of the vacant ones, but can't do showings, and if they have boards on their windows, people aren't really buying them sight unseen.
Right.
So the big thing was we've got to do something about these taxes, and we have to stop them from running out of control.
Right.
And part of it is you see this opportunity. I kind of call it the diamond in the rough. It's really rough, but there could be a diamond here. It's just going to take some work. And it's more or less the legacy that was left behind. And we could just walk away and wash our hands of it. I mean, so I was doing all this also while working full time. And believe it or not, I've had every excuse in the world why I should have had a crap year. But I've had my best year yet.
Isn't that interesting, man? Isn't that interesting? When we make a decision to level up, we just level up in all areas of our life, right? I find that fascinating, but it is the absolute truth, because as human beings, man, we tell ourselves more about what we can't do versus on focusing on what we can, right? And oftentimes we have to get put in positions where we're forced to rise up to be able to discover that, man, we have a massive amount of capacity. So, man, good on you for that. That's great. I'm really happy for you and very excited for you about that, because now you are able to create a new possibility, not only for yourself, but your family. So, here's something that's really interesting. I heard you say legacy, right? You had the option of either moving this legacy forward or letting it go. But when I hear legacy and I'm hearing your story, what I see is that your dad, man, left you a gift. Okay. And it wasn't a gift in the real estate. It was a gift in what you needed to do and what you need to do now to take this inheritance, right? And as you put it, mold it into a diamond. Right now, he left you a diamond in the rough, but to mold it into a diamond, right? And it's the journey to that place that, man, I promise you, man, is the greatest gift that he will have left you. So when you get to that place and you look back, it's going to be an amazing, amazing gift because of all the experiences that you'll have amassed, right? To move yourself into a greater possibility than today, just like you've done, man, just like you've done with the insurance business. So I love this. I find it fascinating, man. Okay. So Rama, let's talk a little bit about what have you learned now that you are a real estate owner, okay? And you've had literally the privilege of working through some of these challenges on a firsthand basis, right? So now you can relate to owners, operators like me on a much different level than someone who has no experience, not only in real estate, but working through various real estate challenges and obstacles, because it makes you appreciate risk very differently, right? So what has been the greatest lesson, man, that you can share with our operators and investors out there on this call?
Probably one of the biggest things I've learned is don't cut corners. Do things correctly first time around, or otherwise you're going to end up with a heap of, rundown properties. You hear some of the greatest success stories are somebody who's able to buy their first, 50 to 100 unit complex by finding a rundown complex where the owner has really just done nothing and it's in such bad condition that you can't really take out any debt on it. So you buy it on a land contract and then you capital into it and then get it reappraised and then you do a cash out refi. So that's basically just don't cut corners and invest into your property so that way you're not hit with all these expenses all at once and you can't fund it. The other thing I've learned is single family homes are a nightmare. There's a reason why multifamily is such an attractive asset class.
Yeah, no doubt, man. No doubt. So when you say single family homes a nightmare, why? Why that comment?
That's a good question. And there are some great operators out there that have very successful, very large single family home portfolios. I guess that's just been my experience. But for me, it's when you have an apartment community, say you've got 25 single family homes versus 25 units in one complex. You have economies of scale, you have one roof, you have a good idea of the internals, the electrical, the plumbing, the heating. It's all consistent within the 25 units versus with single family homes, it's all over the board. The roof conditions are anywhere from 10 to 20 years old. Each one will need to be replaced within the next 10 to 15 years. Who knows how old the electrical is? Who knows when the last water heater or furnace was done? There's just a lot more little things that can nickel and dime you and take up your time. The big one here is time.
Right. Hey, I really appreciate you sharing that. So let me ask you this. If someone were to show you a way where you could sell these properties and exchange the value of these properties into an apartment building, because it sounds like that's really where your focus is right now, right? That's where you're seeing the value. Would you be open to doing that?
Yes, absolutely. My intention and my goal is to stabilize these assets and either sell them as a package or take out debt against them to finance a future acquisition. Granted, the multifamily market's pretty hot right now, so finding a deal that makes sense on paper is a challenge, but I guess it just means you need to look at more deals and underwrite more to find the good ones.
That's all it means, man. That's all it means. You just need to get smarter about how you find opportunity and then, of course, how you are looking at opportunity, right? There's always opportunity. It doesn't matter what the markets are doing, what the cycle is. Always opportunity. Okay, Rama, so I really appreciate you sharing that. Okay, and then after this call, I'll give you some ideas on what you can do to trade up into some apartment buildings, right? So let's talk a little bit about the risks associated with apartment buildings, right? So when you're underwriting risk as an insurance company, what are some of the common risks, I should say, that owner-operators should be aware of, and investors as well, right? Passive investors, because ultimately if the properties aren't insured, something happens, right? Property catches fire, goes down in flames, as they say. So does your investment, right? Your principal investment. So talk to us a little bit about some of the risks that we as operators should be considering at every acquisition, right? And how to mitigate against that using insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking at an acquisition, you really want to already have your insurance broker looking at the deal with you as you're doing it. You want to, don't trust the numbers that are in the offer memorandum. that the listing broker tells you the insurance is. You need to be communicating with your broker that should be considered a partner from the beginning to help you evaluate and underwrite these deals. So in the Midwest, there's a lot of 1960s, 1970s constructed frame apartment buildings. That's what majority of the inventory is. So the risks that are associated with buildings of that time, stab lock and Federal Pacific breakers, those are big. Basically, if you have one of those, you're going to be receiving very unfavorable insurance terms and conditions.
I had a property like that, by the way. I had to replace all the panels.
Yeah. So and then also with aluminum wiring, the mitigation, or the remediation for that is the pigtail method. And you can use all of these found issues in negotiating with the seller. So you can negotiate the cost to remediate these into the offer or deal. We're seeing a big increase in premise liability suits, so slip and falls. And it's a mixture of accident chasing lawyers, social media, people seeing more of these types of suits, and the judgments are being boosted up by, so if it ever goes to a jury, believe it or not, there's been record-sized judgments that are being awarded, and part of it is millennials being on juries thinking, yeah, why not? Let's give them $10 million. Screw the corporation. As there's social aspects like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then,
man, I never really thought about that, but what you said makes a lot of sense, right? Because in a market like this, where we have social unrest, there's challenge, there's economic challenge, in theory, claims will go up, right? Anytime you have higher unemployment, you have social unrest like this, there are challenges in the marketplace, in theory, claims are going to go up. But I find it really interesting, though, about what you said about record judgments being awarded. And a lot of that has to do with the makeup of the jury. So what advice then can you give our operators to mitigate against that, right? Because you brought up some great points. You said, hey, look, these are some issues that I'm seeing out in my markets. The Security Pacific breakers are one of them, right? Highly flammable, and that is a documented fact. So those cause quite a bit of electrical issues. I don't even think they're allowed to be installed anymore in many states, even Texas for that matter. You can barely find those anyways for replacement, right? And then, of course, the aluminum wiring.
That's correct.
Yeah. What's some advice then that you can give our audience on how to deal with just some of the issues that you're seeing right now as it relates to litigation, right? A slip and fall. No one wants a slip and fall accident to turn into, a $100,000 or $200,000 judgment, right? When that person likely is going to be walking the next day or 2 days later. But hey, you might have, to your point, some ambulance chasing attorneys out there that might see that as an opportunity. So what's some advice that you have about that?
You definitely want to make sure you have very strong partners, especially if you're not managing the asset yourself. You want to make sure that the third-party property manager has a very strong, more or less, documentation of anything and everything. When you acquire an asset, you want to make sure the grounds in the parking lot are cleaned up. In the Midwest, there's a lot of torn up parking lots. The sidewalks, you want to make sure everything's clean. And yes, this does cost more money, but in the long run, if it prevents even one claim from happening, it's safe. You might not feel it financially, but it'll cause you a headache and take up your time, which is truly invaluable. It's really about just implementing best practices. One exclusion that we've been seeing pop up more and more is assault and battery exclusion or firearms exclusion, which would basically say the insurance carrier is not going to defend you if you're pulled into a lawsuit as a result of a firearm discharge on one of your properties. And that's something that you need to look for and push back on. So just because they throw it in there doesn't mean it has to be in there. They can pull it out. It can be negotiated out. Just further best practices. If it's market rate apartments, you definitely want to make sure that you have a robust tenant liability or renter's insurance program. A lot of claims are actually tenant costs. And that provides you basically at a minimum $100,000 in tenant liability. So if they have started a cooking fire, you can make a claim against that policy and not hit your own depending on how big the fire was.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good one, man. That's an important one. And that's something that we have made practice, right? Because you're right. Oftentimes, a lot of these challenges are tenant related. And so, yeah, I think that renter's policy is really a good first step to mitigate against loss that typically isn't caused by the landlord or the property manager for that matter. So I really appreciate that, Rama. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. Okay, so we talked a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing today and how the cost for insurance is increasing because of, it sounds like many of these record claims. You have a lot of claims right now that are happening. And then, of course, this is outside of the fact that many insurers just haven't been able to mitigate against COVID in general because not too many, I'm sure, anticipated a pandemic. No one probably included a pandemic as an exclusion, right? What are you seeing right now in the insurance world, okay, that is changing as a result of COVID-19? Things that we should be aware of as operators that can improve how we do business, okay, based on some of the changes that you're seeing, or things that you see that could increase costs moving forward for whatever reason?
So the good news is within at least our client base, the rent collections through COVID were, especially those first 3 and 4 months, were at 97%. There was a lot of fear around delinquent rents the first couple months and then not being able to service the debt. The good news is we haven't been seeing any, I guess, tenant to owner COVID-related issues popping up. If you have employees, you would want to ensure that you're following the recommended COVID best practices, because if it can be traced back to you that they caught it at work, it could be a potential, employment practices suit for creating an unsafe workspace. But it can be as simple as just making sure the employees have the proper PPE when out in the field. In terms of the commercial real estate, like office space, that there's a lot of uncertainty there. There's a lot of, I guess, prior to COVID, we were already going into a hard market, and we had been for almost probably 8 to 12 months. Meaning the property rates are going up, and that's been primarily driven by just an increase in catastrophic claims. I'm pretty sure it's not on fire where you're at, but you see the fires in California, the hurricanes that are hitting, the southern states. Right. And then throughout the Midwest, we're seeing an increase in hail and wind claims.
Interesting. Weather patterns changing.
Yeah. So back to COVID, verdict's not out yet on what the potential changes are going to be as a result of COVID. I just know that in the commercial, especially the office retail space, they're really underwriting the financials. They want to know, is this asset going to, even though they're not the lender, they still want to know that the financials are good.
Yeah. No, I can see that, but I can totally see that. Okay, so I appreciate you sharing that about COVID. So Rama, let's talk about one of your success stories, okay, so that our audience, they can have a better understanding. And when I say a success story that you can map over to insurance, right? So say you have a client, owns an apartment building, 100 units, 200 units, whatever the amount is, came to you, they wanted to look at insuring the risk of that apartment building with you. So maybe talk through an example like that, because I've learned when you can use examples and you can talk people through that example of story, it just makes everything more tangible, right? It makes things real and people can relate to that better. So do you have one that you can share and just maybe some of the risks that you've been able to mitigate and how you did that?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of a recent example is someone who was, we were connected by a referral of an existing client. They connected me to the buyer that was buying an asset from them, and they're having trouble with finding insurance that made the deal work. So we connected, and I figured out what the goals are of the buyer and where does this need to be to make the deal work. And he told me, I said, okay, let me see what we can do. So we put together our statement of values based on the rating factors of square footage, number of units, age of construction type, when the recent updates were done. And we put together the proposal, and we took it and we started talking to, so there's maybe 5 or 6 admitted insurance carriers that will even consider habitational apartment risk. And we started talking to them, and basically we went out there without spinning to every single one. We went out there and told the story of where it needed to be, shared the best practices that they were going to partner with a third-party property manager, and the proactive on maintenance. Here's the CapEx schedule. Here's what they're doing. This is why this is a good long-term partnership. And we were able to get some special credit to get this deal done. And we set the expectation moving forward, saying, hey, this is what to expect in terms of increases, so you can budget for this over the next couple of years. This could change, but this is on the conservative end. So that's one. And then our relationship with our carriers would be akin to an investor's relationship with a asset, like a multifamily asset broker.
Right.
If you don't have a good relationship with them, they're not going to bring deals to you. So our relationships with our carriers are also equally as important when we need a favor done. Other brokers might have access to the same carrier, but if the relationship's not there, declined or not pushed through, we can get pushed through or find a home for it.
Hey, I really like that. So what goes into that relationship with the carrier where you get preferential treatment, right? What are the things that you do on your end as a firm to really cement those kind of relationships so that, you just get better service or better consideration, right, than other firms would?
Yeah. So I can't say that we get preferential treatment, but we can say that we bring them very, in layman's terms, profitable business. We bring them clean, good assets or accounts. We have good loss ratios with them. So
that's what it is. Okay, I got it. Yep.
Yeah. That's pulling back the curtain all the way.
Yeah. So that's good. So if you have really sophisticated, savvy operators that are not submitting a lot of claims, not taking a lot of losses, then I think they should get rewarded for or with better coverage, right? With better coverage and also less expensive cost of coverage as well. So that makes a lot of sense. Why do you think maybe your loss ratio, I'm sure, is a reflection of your clientele, but why do you think it's as low as, what you're describing? Maybe what's the driver there?
It really is. You can't plan for the unexpected. That's really what the insurance is there for. But a lot of our clients, they partner with us to help understand the holistic approach to risk and understand the unknown risks that they might not be aware of, whether that's through loss control services, doing pre-inspections or doing walkthroughs on properties. So that way they're aware of things that they should improve that they might not have thought of otherwise. We help them. Often we'll do contract review with their vendors to make sure they're transferring risk onto the vendor or in a favorable manner. It's really just partnering with companies that have best practices. I walked away from an account that somebody referred over to me, and it was an old motel that had converted to efficiencies in kind of a seedy area. And, the owner wasn't completely honest. He wasn't upfront. He was a price buyer, which is fine, but he was really not looking at the bigger long-term picture. And that's really not something that I'm comfortable working on, especially if they're not honest with me. It makes me look bad. If I take something to a carrier and it turns out to be misrepresented, it still comes back to me. It hurts my relationship.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And I can understand that. Integrity is key, and it doesn't matter what industry, right? Integrity is key. And so I really appreciate that. Well, hey, Rama, we're coming towards the end of our show. And I really appreciate you being on, man. This has been a really great conversation. Very inspired by how you've been able to communicate or articulate inheritance that your dad left you and how you have converted that inheritance into experiences that are likely going to benefit you more than the value of that estate will, right? In other words, you're going to be able to take that and multiply that because of the lessons that you're learning and how you're applying that forward. I think that's incredible. I think that's great. And so for that, I just want to thank you for being a great guest. Also, just sharing your perspective on insurance and risk and how to mitigate that and how to use insurance to do that, especially because now you have a very different lens to be able to look at insurance through, right? Or from, for that matter. And that is the lens of an owner and someone now that's also operating real estate. It just makes you look at things very differently. I always have a rule. At this point, I really don't do business with folks, especially vendors that I need in our business, if they don't have experience in the product that we either service or are in. In this case, it's real estate, right? For example, if you're working with a CPA, insurance person for that matter, great example, and they don't own real estate, they're just looking at real estate much differently than you are. And I've had to learn that over many years. So I think now you're in a very unique position where you're able to look at real estate, right, and risk from the same lens as an operator, and it just changes how I think you can communicate that. So for that, man, I really appreciate you. So before we ask you to share how people can get in touch with you, what is the question that you have for me, Rama, that you think can add some value to our audience? And then we're going to share with how people can get in touch with you.
The question for you that would really add value to the audience is why? What's your why? Why do you do what you're doing? What kind of life or community are you trying to create?
That's a great question. You're the second person who's asked me that. So, when I get into the topic of why, and I'm going to answer this specifically, but my why looks a little bit different for different things that I do, right? So for business, for example, my why is to build great apartment communities and improve how people live, right? And we call that our purpose inside of our company. Some people call it a vision. We call it our purpose, and I call it our purpose. And I've been communicating that to our teams for several years now. But if you ask people on our team, hey, what is your purpose, or why do you folks do what you do? My guess is they would be able to repeat that and explain that. But the difference is that, when you're really clear about your purpose and why you're doing what you're doing, and that purpose actually serves someone greater than yourself, right? The natural byproduct is profits, right? So my focus was, I said, okay, hey, look, if we focused on our residents, okay, and literally making sure that the communities that we touch and we operate, that we build them out to be amazing communities, and there are ways that we measure that. And then we also focus on improving how the residents inside of these communities live, actually improving how they live. The natural byproduct now will be more profitable communities. And I believe that we've proved that thesis out, right, within our own portfolio. So that's why we operate that way. And that is my why and our why as a company for why we do what we do.
That's awesome. It's so important to know your why. At the end of the day, I was pursuing medicine because I wanted to help people. Well, here in this role, I still get to do that. I get to bring value. I get to continue helping people and bring solutions. So it's really, I'm still doing what I wanted to do, just in a different facet.
Right, for sure. And that's a great example. So I really appreciate that. So hopefully that adds some context, but if you were to ask me that outside of business, it would be also very different, right? Like, hey, what is my why outside of business for me as a person, right? As a man, it would be very different than that, obviously. So that why is going to change depending on the category of my life, right? So for example, as people, as human beings, man, we're not like one-dimensional human beings, right? Even though for whatever reason, that's kind of what's communicated in school, in many areas of employment, we're not really treated holistically, right? So, most people are really, really good at going to work. The focus is always work and production at work, okay? But work and production at work doesn't always translate into, you being able to have a healthy body or you being able to have a healthy and thriving family, right? So, for me, I've learned to look at things a little bit differently just based on my experiences, that why is going to change depending on the category of your life. Example, your body, right? That's one category, your health. The other side of that would be your faith. The other category would be your family. And lastly, what we call our franchise would be business. So my why will vary depending on the area or the category that you asked. In this case, it was business. And it's really a reflection also of our podcast, right? Which is the exact same purpose. We build great apartment communities. Make sense?
I love that answer. Fantastic.
Awesome, man. Hey, well, Rama, I wish you the very best, man, and continued success. I know you're going to continue to crush it and grow and do some amazing things. And then, of course, with the portfolio that you have in place now, look forward to hearing the success story from that and how you've been able to take that and multiply that into, greater opportunities. So I want to wish you the very best. How do people get in touch with you, buddy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can shoot me an email. It's my first name, period, last name at capnick.com. That's RAMA, period, GUPTA at KAPNICK.com. Or reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Rama Gupta, Capnick, LinkedIn, on Google, and you'll find me. Or you can even shoot me a text at myself, 517-894-5940.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you so much for being on. And man, I want to wish you continued success.
John, thank you.
Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.